Unit 8, Day 1, Intro to Trig Ratios and Finding a Missing Side. So I've got two triangles up here. They're identical triangles, but if you notice the description, one of them says from angle A and one of them says from angle B. The first task we are going to do today is determine what sides of a triangle we have looking from an angle. And the one on the left, it says from angle A. Here's how we label the three sides. The side directly across the angle is called the opposite side, which we'll abbreviate OPP. The longest side of a right triangle, which is always across from the right angle, is the hypotenuse. And then the third side is called the adjacent side because it's adjacent to the angle. And one of the ways that I like to remember is that the two sides that make up the angle are always adjacent and hypotenuse. And the opposite is always across the triangle. So in the triangle on the right, it says from angle B. So now we have a different perspective. Here's my angle B. Well, now if you look across the triangle, the opposite side's on the bottom. So it changed from the one on the left. Now the nice thing about the hypotenuse is that the hypotenuse always stays the hypotenuse. And then as we described in the other triangle, the angle is always made up of hypotenuse and adjacent. So now adjacent is over here. What we are going to do now is introduce our trig ratios. In a right triangle, there are three important ratios to remember. The first one is called sine. You pronounce it sine, but you write down SIN as the abbreviation. And here it is. Sine of an angle, and there's my angle symbol, equals the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Cosine, which is abbreviated COS, but we say cosine. Cosine of the angle is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And the third one is called tangent. We abbreviate it TAN, but we say tangent. Tangent of the angle equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. To help remember those ratios, I use the mnemonic SOHCAHTOA, SOH-CAH-TOA. SOHCAHTOA. That's the shortest one for me to remember. And SO stands for sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. CA stands for cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And TOA stands for tangent equals opposite over adjacent. Now, there are many sayings also that might help. I think this is a little bit long for me to remember, but I'll write it down anyway. You might have heard this in middle school. Some old horse caught another horse taking oats away. So some old horse, there's your SO, sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Caught another horse, there's CA, cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Taking oats away, there's your TOA, tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So whatever you use to remember it, you need to know those three ratios. For the sake of review, let's jot down those three ratios again. Sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine of the angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent of the angle equals opposite over adjacent. In example 1, it says, given the right triangle ABC, find the following. Sine A equals cosine A equals tangent A equals. First thing I want you guys to recognize is what angle we are looking from. We're looking from angle A. That means I need to identify these sides. Well, across from angle A is the opposite side. So 6 represents the opposite. 10 is the longest side. It's across the right angle. That's my hypotenuse, which makes 8 my adjacent. And again, just remember, the angle we're talking about is always made up of the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So to find these ratios, sine, I look up above, is the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So we are just going to create a fraction that's the opposite divided by hypotenuse. So in this case, it's 6 over 10. And I just leave it. You don't have to simplify. You don't have to divide it out. That's the ratio. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So look at your triangle. You already have the sides labeled. The adjacent is 8. Hypotenuse is 10. So cosine of A is 8 over 10. And lastly, tangent. You look up above. Tangent says the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. So the opposite side is 6. The adjacent is 8. And there's that ratio, 6 over 8. Now let's start solving for a missing side. Example 2 says find the value of x to the nearest tenth. First thing we'll do in the triangle is look at the angle, where it's located, and identify what two sides are labeled. So angle 42 is on the bottom there. Across from it is the opposite, so x represents the opposite side. And 10 is the hypotenuse. So now, if I'm talking about opposite and hypotenuse, I have to look up above or have it memorized. Which one is opposite and hypotenuse? That would be sine. So since I'm using sine, I now need to create an equation. And here's how we create the equation. Sine, we write down S-I-N, of the angle, which in this case is 42 degrees, equals the opposite side, which is x, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 10. Now it's a simple one-step solution, and then we use the calculator. And there's a saying, we'll show you a video in a few days once we get all these lessons done. In this type of equation, when x is up high, meaning the top of the fraction, multiply. So to solve this equation, we are going to multiply both sides by 10. That cancels over here and just gives me an x, and now I need to put 10 sine 42 into the calculator. So here's where we get the calculator involved. Grab your calculator, and the first thing we need to do is make sure we are in the appropriate mode. And this is super important if you borrow a calculator or if you have to clear your memory on the calculator. So before we put that in, I want you to go to mode, hit the mode key. And you see this menu, and you have to scroll down to where it says radian degree and make sure degree is highlighted and hit enter. Because if radian is highlighted, we get completely wrong answers. So highlight degree, hit enter. Now you can hit second mode again to get out of that. And now all you have to do is put this into the calculator exactly the way you see it. You don't even need to put the degree symbol in there because we're already in degree mode. So I'll type in 10. You don't even need the multiplication sign. Sine, S-I-N, it's 2 buttons above the 7. 42. Close your parentheses, hit enter, and there's your value of x. We just need to round to the nearest tenth, it said. So 6.7. All right, example 3, different triangle, same directions. Find the value of x to the nearest tenth. So the only thing that's going to really change here is I'll put the angle in a different location. We might have to work with a different trig ratio. But other than that, it's pretty similar. So there's my angle, 34 degrees. As you look across the triangle, that's your opposite side. So x is the opposite. Remember, the angle is made up of hypotenuse and adjacent. So 23 is either the hypotenuse or adjacent. In this case, it's adjacent. Hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle, which we don't know. So now I have opposite and adjacent. It's just a matter of looking up above or having it memorized. What trig function uses opposite and adjacent? That is tangent. So now, in this problem, I'm using tangent. But the equation is going to look very similar. tangent of the angle, in this case it's 34 degrees, equals the opposite side, which is my x, divided by my adjacent side, which is 23. This equation looks very similar to the one up above, so we will multiply both sides by 23. That cancels over here. That means I'll just have an x equals, and in my calculator, I'm already in degree mode. You don't have to do that every time. You just have to do it once. You type in 23 tangent 34, close your parentheses, hit enter. 15.5 is what you get there. Our last example, 4. Again, find the value of x to the nearest tenth. Look at the angle and identify what two sides you're given. Well, we've said that the two sides that make up the angle are adjacent and hypotenuse. 18 is clearly the longest side here. That's hypotenuse. X is adjacent. So now you have to determine which of the three trig ratios is adjacent over hypotenuse, and that is cosine. So the way you say it is cosine, but again, you just write down the abbreviation, which is COS. Cosine of the angle, 25 degrees, equals the adjacent side, x, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 18. That equation is in the same pattern as the others, which means I just need to multiply by 18 because x is up high. Those cancel. X side. And then on the calculator, we put in 18 cosine 25, close your parentheses, 16.3. And that concludes Lesson 8.1.